Hey everyone, thanks for joining me for another devlog for Dauphin. Today is Friday, January the 1st, which of course marks the exciting start to a new year. Unfortunately, it also marks a little over a month since my last devlog. Throughout November and December, work and life both just got very busy all of a sudden, and video production unfortunately fell to the back burner. Not to worry though, Dauphin has remained very much in development and continues to grow, much like my plans for the channel in 2021, which include a hopefully more consistent upload schedule. But enough about that. You're probably wondering what all has changed in Dauphin in the past month or so. And the answer is unfortunately not a whole lot that you'll probably be able to notice from gameplay. Because I didn't have the bandwidth to make a video, I really didn't want to jump into a brand new feature. So I focused on a lot of tech debt and bug fixes that I had on my Trello board, and overall just wanted to give myself a clean slate on top of which to build a brand new feature for the first video of this year. So just what will that new feature be? Probably not too hard to guess based on the ship that you see floating here in front of the player. This is a brand new piece of artwork I've been working on that I'm calling the research vessel, and this is what the player will use to travel between islands in the game. Everything we've seen of Dauphin up to this point has been on my little prototype island here, but a really important part of gameplay for me is for the player to be able to explore different islands across various oceans, discover new species, discover new sources of corruption, and cleanse them all. So this is going to be a really important feature for the game. As you might imagine, this is going to be a lot of work that probably spans across multiple videos, and unfortunately I haven't even captured the entire scope of the work in my Trello board yet, but we'll go ahead and take a look at what I have really quickly. You can see the first thing I've done is create some basic prototype artwork for the boat, and at this point I want to create a way for the player to board the boat, and those first two tasks are related there. I want to have some way to anchor the boat to whatever island the player is currently on, and then create an interaction so that the player can exit the island, board the boat, and leave for a new island. Now, unfortunately, as I started thinking of a way to create an anchoring system for the research vessel, I uncovered kind of a troubling foundational issue with the way I've been building the game so far. Right now we're looking at my project settings, and more specifically the 2D physics layers, and these are the layers used for collisions. As you can see, I have quite a few, and when I was thinking about how to let the research vessel know that it was in water and looking for land, I thought, okay, I'll just create 2 more layers. After I did that, I kind of took a step back here and realized that I am using 3/4 of the available physics layers provided by the Godot engine, and at this rate, I'm sure to run out. So I took a screenshot of this thing and posted it to Twitter with the hope of probing some of the very bright minds in the game development community, and before long I realized I was just taking a very incorrect approach to using these layers. If you look closely, a lot of these layers are very specific and really have implicit gameplay logic kind of baked in. I don't want that. What I should really have here is a smaller number of more generic layers and move that implicit logic to the code where it can be explicit and really easier to debug and manage. That refactor is what I'm going to jump into today. I would assume it's probably going to take a little while and certainly not be as fun as building out a brand new feature, but I really think fixing these kind of core issues and building a strong foundation as early as possible is the best way to go about this. So I'm going to go heads down for now and hopefully catch up before too long. Hey everyone, welcome back to Sunday afternoon, just going on 12 o'clock or so right now, and I'm happy to report that I have some good news. Over the past 2 days I had quite a bit of success simplifying my approach to using collision layers. If I go into my project settings here and to my 2D physics layer names page, you'll notice that we no longer have 14 very specific layers. Instead, we now have 6 rather generic layers, and that was the goal of the refactor, to kind of move some of the implicit logic from those specific layers into the code. So to show you how that worked out, we'll go ahead and take a look at my sand crab. So here is my sand crab, which should hopefully look a little bit familiar. If we click on the top level object and look over in the inspector, you can see that I've expanded the collision section here. We can take a look at the sand crab's layer and its masks. The sand crab is a member of the organism layer because it's an organism, and the layers that it's looking for in the mask section are objects so that it can bump into objects in the world, other organisms so that it can collide with organisms, and terrain, which means that it will collide with any terrain that's been marked for collision, such as the water right now. But that's actually not entirely what I wanted to show you guys. If we look at the detection circle here, which is a child of the sand crab, that's this big blue circle that you see here in the window. And what this is intended to do is detect when the player's nearby so that the crab can start to chase the player. If we look at the mask here, this mask used to be set to a player collision layer so that it only looked for the player. Now it's just looking for character, which can be the player or other NPCs. So let's jump into the code to see how we handle that. So here we are in the sand crab script, and we're looking down in my signals section, specifically the body entered signal that is broadcasted by the detection circle we were just looking at. Now previously the way I had this set up was for the detection circle to only look for the player via the mask, as we just talked about. So that meant that this body was always going to be the player and we didn't have to do any extra checks. But that's kind of that implicit logic I was talking about. Now that the detection circle can detect any type of character, we just have to add this one line here to make sure that that body is what we actually want to be looking for, in our case the player. And just as you'd expect, the end result is basically just as it was before. Once we get within a certain range of one of these crabs, it will enter the chase state and begin to chase the player around. With that refactor wrapped up, it's time to get on to the fun stuff, which is getting the player aboard the research vessel. First, I think I'm going to try to work out a way to anchor the boat to the land on the island, and then create an interaction with that anchor to allow the player to actually board the boat. Alright, it is now going on 2:30 p.m, almost time for a little break for me, but I wanted to give you guys a quick update first. So as you can see, we're on the beach and there is a new visual element on the screen, and that is this new anchor and the rope that connects the anchor to the research vessel. Now, this is actually just a pretty straightforward system. We have a static body 2D for the sand anchor, and then a line 2D with a custom texture for the rope. Pretty straightforward, but what this ultimately sets up is the ability for the player to interact with the anchor on the beach in order to board the research vessel. So if I go up here and tap E, we're asked if we're ready to board. Now it was at this point that I realized when I built out this interaction manager, I created no way so far for you to actually provide a response, yes or no, or other dialogue options in the future with other NPCs. That's going to throw a little bit of a wrench into the plans I had for this feature. I had not really budgeted time for building out the interaction manager, but it's obviously something that's important to the game and something that needs to be done. So that's what we're going to jump into next. But as I mentioned, I've been on the grind this afternoon and I think I'm due for a break. And on top of that, I'm actually back to work tomorrow. My holiday break is on its way out the door. So I think I might just relax this evening, enjoy what little free time I have left before getting into the swing of all that work stuff again, and probably pick things up again tomorrow morning. Of course, I'll check in when I have some more progress. Hey everyone, back with a quick update bright and early here on Tuesday morning, just before I jump back into development for the day. As you can see, we're standing here on the beach and nothing actually looks very different until we get right up next to this sand anchor, as I'm calling it, and press the interact key, which right now is E. At this point, we will have a dialogue pull up, and instead of just having a question now, we have two possible answers, yes and not yet. And these are two buttons that are being programmatically generated here on this dialog based on information that I've put in the dialog JSON. So here's that JSON that I'm using to generate the prompt when you interact with the anchor. What we had before was just name, expression, and text, but now we have a new object called responses, which is really just an array of name, expression, and text objects. You can see we have two options here, affirmative and negative. Now over here in my dialog interface script, I've got a function called create options, and we look through that JSON here and look for options that are presented in the JSON. If we find some, then for each one we create an instance of a dialog button and add it to the dialog interface. To tie everything together here, when you actually select one of these options, the data associated with that option is signaled all the way up from the dialog interface to whichever node presented that dialog. In my case, the anchor here, which is connected to the boat. What that means is that when I click yes, I am able to capture a signal on the boat to let it know that the player wants to board. Now that we have a trigger to board the boat, it's time to actually get the player on there, and that's what I'm going to be working on this morning. I'm going to put on some music, enjoy some coffee, and just go heads down for a bit, so I'll check in when I have some progress. Alright guys, it is now Wednesday morning going on 8:30 a.m. and I think we're coming up on the last update of the devlog after a really productive early start this morning. Over the past 24 hours, I've focused all my attention on the transition of the player from the island to his research vessel, and there's certainly a number of ways I could have gone about this. What I've opted for is more of a kind of cinematic transition rather than a handmade pixel art animation. So with that said, I'll just go ahead and show you guys the transition, and I'd love to hear what you think down in the comments. There are definitely a couple of things to unpack here, and as I talk about it, I'll go ahead and play that again in the background for you guys to watch a second time. Now, obviously the transition itself is fairly straightforward. It's just a zoom out and a fade out and a zoom in and a fade in. Very easy to implement and also very easy to tweak things like the timing. Perhaps the more interesting discussion is the one regarding the gameplay decision driving this transition. Now, as you can see, we've transitioned to the research vessel out in the open ocean, and it looks very dark. It's meant to look like nighttime, but I know the visuals need a lot of work here. Now, what this really reinforces is the idea that after a long day of exploration on the island, you've come back to your research vessel to kind of rest and call an end to the day. At this point in the day on your research vessel, my thought process is that you could enter your cabin here and use your research instrumentation to learn more about samples you collected in the field. You could also perform activities like fishing from the boat and charting your course for the next island that you want to visit the next day. Now, with all that said, I think it's important to note that I am not at all locked into this approach. I think it would be perfectly fine and perhaps make even more sense for the player to be able to board and leave their research vessel as many times as they like throughout the day and travel to other islands throughout the course of the day. Over the next couple days, I'll definitely be spending a lot of time thinking about how I want this system to work and ultimately facilitate the player's travel between islands. And of course, I'd love to hear your take on this down in the comments. Do you like what I've done so far? What would you change? And really, what sounds the most fun? In any case, with the player now being able to board the research vessel, I think we've hit a great stopping point before the next devlog, in which we'll be working on a brand new island for the player to be able to navigate to and explore. As always, hope you guys enjoyed this week's devlog. If you did, consider leaving a thumbs up because it definitely helps the channel grow. Alright guys, I'll see you in the next video. Stay safe.